This is a conference of hope, igniting the dream of economic justice in Rhode Island. My name is Leona Nelson Davies, and I am the Executive Director of the Economic Progress Institute. Thank you, all of you, for being here today. As we gather in this space, I would like to invite a member of the Narragansett Tribe and the Assistant Director of the Tonopah Museum, my Rhode Island Foundation Equity Leadership Initiative core sister, Sybil Moon LaRose, to start us off with a land acknowledgement.
Welcome everyone to the lands of the Narragansett. When Muskrat used his last breath to dive to the bottom of the waters, he floated back to the top with earth in his hand. And that earth was placed on the back of Turtle, who would carry the world, a place for the first woman to rest. Sky Woman gave her body to the earth so that everything from her body could nourish the earth and make everything grow. She left behind a brother and a sister, her twins, who were the first people of this place. But two people do not populate a whole world. Not in every culture. And so Creator made people to populate this earth. And from the places where the land and the water meet, in our language, Nahahagansik talks about the points of land that meet the water. It's at those spaces that we find clay. And from that clay, Creator gathered up that mud, and he packed it together, and he took pieces of shell from the water and crushed that to temper it, and parts of the plants of the earth to finish the clay and form them into people. We are formed of the very earth, which is why Indigenous people will often introduce themselves as being of a place, because that earth is what we were made from. And he brought those people all formed, ready to bake in a very large oven, but he didn't get around to it right away. And he left things unattended for a minute. And Coyote had been watching all of this and was very curious. And he said, I want to get in on that. I'm going to bake a few of those people. And he took a couple of the formed beings and put them into the oven. But he was so excited that he pulled them out too soon, and Caucasians were formed. And they stood around, waiting for the next batch. But people get impatient, and they started to talk, and they decided instead of waiting around, we're going to head our own way. And they took off for other lands around Turtle Island, and they formed their own communities. And what they didn't wait for was for Creator to have instructed them on how we're supposed to live on this land. And Coyote got back to work baking, and he put in another batch. And this time he wanted to wait longer to make sure that they were going to be perfect. And he kept them in for a long time. And when they came out beautifully brown, he thought, these people are gorgeous, lovely people. Let me see if I can do it again with another batch. And he left those people there waiting. And as he baked the next batch, those people stood and they waited, and they waited, and they decided, you know, we're going to go find our own place in this world. And he didn't wait for Creator to come and teach them how to live upon this world together with all of the beings. And so they went and found their own places in this world. And when the last batch came out, the Indigenous people who remained in these lands, they were there when Creator returned and instructed them on how to live. And so he taught them that we have to live in a way that services everybody, that takes care of everybody, that everyone will have all their needs met. And at the same time, we have to care for this earth. This earth is what you were made from. She's your mother. She gave birth to you. And she nourishes you from everything on this earth. And so everything you have to do, you have to consider her as well and care for her just as you would your mother. And so he gave them these teachings, and they formed an economy around it. An economy that never took too much and always gave back and made sure that it cared for everyone. But when others came to this land, they returned without that knowledge, and they changed things here. And it became difficult to us to survive within our homelands. And we have become homeless in our homelands. So our dream for economic progress is for us to be able to continue to exist upon these lands in a good way, in the way that Creator instructed us to do. That's always giving back to the land and giving to each other and caring for everyone. And I think that's possible. And that's our dream. So I leave that dream with you today as you discuss many good ideas for Rhode Island and how we're going to move forward as a united people, because that's the way Creator had intended it from the very beginning. Thank you very much.
Wow, that is the way you start a conference. I love that one. Thank you so much, Simone. For those who are getting to know us, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Economic Progress Institute. We are a research and policy organization advocating for budget and policy changes to improve the economic well-being of low and modest income Rhode Islanders. For over 24 years, EPI have provided equity-centered research, data analysis, education. We have led and partnered in coalitions advocating for a fair tax structure, protecting and enhancing the public support programs to lift children and their families out of deep poverty, support programs for worker justice issues like paid leave, raising a minimum wage, workforce development, addressing racial and economic disparity, and advocating for many other economic justice issues. This is our 12th annual conference, but it is the first conference since the pandemic. It's my first conference as executive director. And it's the first for most of the members of our growing team. I'm going to recognize them later, but give it up for this amazing group of people. In a few minutes, I'm going to invite our board chair to help me thank our over 35 sponsors. But I want you to know that we are overwhelmed with your support and with gratitude, and for our work and supporting all we have done over so many years. To our new friends in the room, we say welcome to this site. Why a conference of hope? This conference is about our collective power for change. It is also about our personal aspirations for the world we want to live in. For me, hope is not just Rhode Island State motto. As a child, it was my survivor prayer in the midst of Liberia's civil war. I used to write in my diaries all the time with this quote: once there's life, there's hope. After I survived the Civil War and immigrated to the United States at the age of 16, continued my journey to becoming a social justice advocate and attorney, hope became my directive for justice. As we thought about the theme of our first conference in 4 years, we all agreed that after going through the pandemic and all the things that have transpired in our nation, in the world, and in our states, we wanted to bring Rhode Islanders together to dream about what is possible, no matter who you are, no matter your age. We have some young leaders in this room today. No matter your race, gender, ability, social, economic status, or zip code. We all deserve to live in a just society where we can thrive. And hope is our directive towards a future of economic justice. Throughout this program, we will share with you a QR code, because you get to work a little bit as well. And this will take you to our collective dream wall, and if people want to test it, you can test it now. As you hear our speakers and panelists speak, I want you to think about your dreams and hope for economic justice. When you feel inspired throughout this conference, please share. Or in church, they say when the Spirit moves you. Share what your dreams will look like. And if there are other dreams that pop up that resonate with you, like them as well. Are we ready for this conversation? Are we ready for this conversation? Well, that is good, because we have brought together some powerful speakers who are ready to inspire and challenge us to dream big, speak up, and act boldly for our people, for our communities, and for our states. And now I'm going to move right along, and I would like to invite our EPI's outgoing board chair, who has served on our board for 6 years, Jessica Sherwood.
Thank you, Wayona, and welcome everybody. It's great to be here with you all this morning. And as Wayona said, I'm Jessica Sherwood, outgoing board chair of EPI. I've been honored to serve on the board for 6 years. I want to thank my fellow board members for being here this morning, but I'm nervous about missing someone, so stand up and wave if you don't hear your name, and stand up and wave if you do hear your name. Geraldine Barclay King. She could be staffing the table. Jill Beckwith, Paula Hodges, Wayne Keys, here he is, Ana Cano Morales, there she is, and Linda Shaw, and there she is, and stand up if I didn't recognize you. All of us on the board are so proud. All of us on the board are so proud of the great work that EPI does. And I also want to thank our many incredible sponsors who made this event possible. I believe William said we have over 35 co-sponsors to this event. And that includes gold sponsors, Neighborhood Health Plan of Rhode Island, and the Pepito Opportunity Connection. Thank you, gold sponsors. And that's applause till the end of the list. Silver sponsor, United Way of Rhode Island. Bronze sponsors are Rhode Island College, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Rhode Island, SEIU, and United Healthcare Community Plan. And many more community champions and partners. You can see them on the back of your page. We're grateful to all of them for your commitment and support of the Economic Progress Institute. Thank you, sponsors. My dream for economic justice in Rhode Island is when kids born in any and every zip code in the state have truly equal opportunities to grow, learn, and thrive. And that's become, a handy, quick explainer, the zip code thing. But our current unequal opportunities throughout the state have the weight of history behind them. And that needs active disruption. For instance, we need to check if and how our annual state budget is allowing inertia or building equity. And the good news is that EPI is doing that, and I'm so pleased. If you are able to, please consider joining me and the rest of the board in making a contribution in support of the Economic Progress Institute. Once again, welcome, and I look forward to sharing today's experience with you.
Thanks, Jessica. We are honored to have several dignitaries in the room with us today. And before I invite a few of them up to give some words, I would like to recognize others. Rhode Island State General Assembly members, we have Senator Pam Gloria, and I know people are spread out, Senator Tiara Mack, Senator Linda Ufusa, Senator Melissa Murray, Senator Sandra Connell. person know who you are. We have State Representative David Morales, who is also a moderator for our Dreamers panel. Representative Rebecca Kislak, Representative Jennifer Stewart. Wave to people. And I'm really excited to have a full team from the Department of City Council, the President Rachel Miller, and other council members. Senator Shelton Wellhouse couldn't be here today, but we are pleased to welcome his policy coordinator, Nick Fensolidi. Thank you for being here with us today. And we have former Congressman David Cicilline, who's relaxing now as other people are going first. The current president and CEO of the Rhode Island Foundation. He is here with his team and members of the Equity Leadership Initiative, my core members. The Rhode Island Foundation is a long-time state funder and partner of EPI. They are here along with the United Way of Rhode Island, who is here with a large team as well. Thank you. And now I would like to invite out a few state leaders to give us some brief remarks. First, I would like to invite out the Democratic Caucus Chair, Representative Grace Diaz, who is here representing the Speaker of the House, who could not be here today.
Good morning, good morning. I need that energy in the room today. Before I give you my remarks, I was checking in Google today, what does it mean Winova? The name of the director. And I find out that your name means expertise, good person, and charming. So she accomplished all those three things. First, I would like to express my gratitude for the invitation to speak here today on behalf of the Speaker of the House, Joseph Chikarchi, and the entire House of Representatives. As a rule, when we go to events representing the House, to introduce the members that are participating here. Even though they were mentioned, I will be punished if I don't do that again. So please help me to welcome Rebecca Kislak. What are you, Rebecca? Thank you. State Rep David Morales. Chairwoman Camila Bella Wilkinson, powerful woman in the House. And Jennifer Stewart, Rep Stewart. What are you? I didn't see you today. It's not here yet? Okay. It is true honor to stand among so many Rhode Islanders who are committed to bringing economic justice to this state. Something that has been a long time goal of mine. As well all know, and I'm sure many speakers today will remind us, economic justice is the belief that economy will be more successful if it is fair and available for everybody. I will let other speakers today talking more about that, but common sense alone tells us that is the truth. That is why, with the support of the Speaker and many members of the House, we have worked diligently for years to bring justice and equity to child care and early education. See, you know me, you know that child care is my motto, my energy, my gas every day when I go to the house. When we invest in our children, it has a ripple effect throughout our state and our entire society. It leads to state families with parents who can provide more for their children, and stable families lead to a stable economy. Last year, we made historic investment in children and youth, including important policies and programs for children and families that will increase access and equity to education, child care, health care, and mental health. While we have made great strides in increasing access to high-quality child care and pre-K, much more need to be done, and we agree on that, right? To ensure that all Rhode Islanders, children and families can take advantage of those critical early learning resources. We must continue to advocate for high-quality early education because investing in our children is literally investing in our future. The impact those educated have in our youngest citizens will follow them throughout their lives and serve as the foundation for everything else we are looking to accomplish. Income equality by gender and race, equal opportunity for employment and credit, and encouraging all members of society to reach their full potential. I am almost done. On behalf of Speaker Joseph Chicarchi, who selected this Dominican African bilingual person to speak on his behalf, in behalf of the entire House of Representatives, I want to express my gratitude for allowing me to speak during this event of hope. Sí se puede. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Diaz. Right from the Start Coalition, love working with you as our legislative champion. I would now like to invite up the Deputy Senate Majority Leader to give some words, and it's Valerie Lawson.
Good morning. Thank you to the Economic Progress Institute for the invitation to be here this morning. On behalf of President Ruggiero, my Senate colleagues, Senator Cano, Gloria, Murray, Mack, and Usafucha, it's an honor to be a part of the conference. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the Senate's accomplishments and priorities and to celebrate the progress we've made in our state. I'm excited to hear from the keynote speakers, as well as the youth, state, and community leaders taking part in today's panels. The focus of this gathering is igniting the dream of economic justice in Rhode Island. Economic justice is the cornerstone of our work in the Senate, and I am proud to say we have made significant strides toward a more just, inclusive, and prosperous Rhode Island in recent years. Together with many advocates, stakeholders, and partners, we've extended security opportunity across our state. And like the representative, I'd like to highlight some of our achievements. Some of them include taking action to address lead poisoning, passing the Let RI Vote Act, passing the Equality in Abortion Coverage Act, codifying Affordable Care Act consumer protections. We've also created driver privilege cards and state identification cards for undocumented Rhode We've eliminated rental application fees. Shout out to Senator Mack making Juneteenth a state holiday. Strengthening penalties for wage theft. These are some of our achievements, and in our state budget, we also increased the earned income tax credit. We're continuing our work to address the housing crisis. We realize that's a significant need in Rhode Island, and there are many projects we are supporting. The representative mentioned our early investment in childhood education, the system, it worked for us, and as an educator, we all know how important that is in our system as a whole. Food insecurity is another issue of concern of us, and we increased funding to the Rhode Island Community Food Bank and created the Hope Scholarship, which will help many Rhode Islanders at Rhode Island College. These are just some of our successes. But as we prepare to convene for our next session in January, know that the Senate remains committed to our shared mission. There's a lot of work that remains and we need to tackle. Building on our progress requires a commitment from all of us. And above all, I ask you to remain involved and help us, keep us informed. We value your voices deeply. We rely on your feedback to help us as leaders and legislators. I look forward, as does the Senate, to our continued work together on behalf of all Rhode Islanders. Thank you.
Thank you, and EP, I look forward to working together with you. We're getting ready. Now, there won't be a conference unless we share some data with you. And I would like to introduce our Director of Research and Fiscal Policy, Alan Krinsky, whose job today is to get our blood pumping just a little. Get us a little upset, get us a little fired up to want to do something about something. He will come up and tell us a little bit about the data and to consider that poverty is a policy choice. And the opposite of that choice can get us to economic justice. Alan?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So today we're here to talk about hope, but I'm here to talk about data. And the data of poverty are not always so cheery. But at EPI, we believe in data-informed and evidence-based policy. And understanding the data of poverty can help us understand and move towards economic justice. So I want to start by discussing how expensive poverty can be. In this June 2023 Boston Globe article, some inquisitive and innovative high school students in Massachusetts purchased the same items from two different Stop and Shops, one in the lower income Jamaica Plain neighborhood and one in the higher income Dedham area. And they found that it cost $34 more, 21.2% more to buy the groceries in the lower income area Stop and Shop than in the higher income one. So even basic groceries can cost more for people with less money. And this is only one of the many ways poverty can be expensive. So rental costs can often approach mortgage costs, sometimes in some areas even exceed mortgage costs. And this is without someone gaining the benefit of gaining wealth by increasing equity in their home. Fines and fees from various sources can lead to further negative consequences, including accumulation of interest, making them only more difficult to pay. And scholars and journalists have written about some other taxes. They're not really financial money kinds of taxes. For example, there's the time tax. How much time people in poverty have to spend negotiating with systems, sometimes inadequate public transportation system, waiting on lines or on hold. All the time it takes to gather documentation to prove that one's in poverty and to jump through various hoops. And then there's the cognitive bandwidth tax. That some people, especially in deep poverty, can have mental stress develop from just having to constantly focus on getting what one needs to survive. And then there are always ways some people seek to victimize people in poverty. For example, payday lenders pretend to offer credit to people, but instead they're offering a path to and profiting off of a cycle of debt that can be hard to escape. The data you see here shows that over the last 15 years, Rhode Island has taken up close to $1 billion in payday loan debt, paying millions of dollars each year in fees, most of which goes out of state. In a way, all of these things can be understood as ways of punishing the poor for being poor. And we have to understand that this is a policy choice. Now I want to turn to some basic Rhode Island data for poverty. This is from the Census Bureau's American Community Survey 5-year estimates from 2017 to 2021. You can see from this slide that the poverty rate for Black or African American Rhode Islanders, as well as for Hispanic and Latino Rhode Islanders, is twice that or above twice that what it is for white Rhode Islanders. And for children, the situation is even worse. Childhood poverty rates in Rhode Island for Black African American children, 2.5 times what it is for white children, and for Latino or Hispanic Rhode Islander children, it's 3 times as high. Here, on your left, if you look at older Rhode Islanders, those 85 and over, have a higher poverty rate than Rhode Islanders in general. And on the right side, for Rhode Islanders with disabilities, there's consistently higher rates of poverty, whether we're talking about being in deep poverty, below 50% of the poverty level, or up to the poverty level, up to twice the poverty level. Now, whether one technically falls below or above the poverty level doesn't tell the full story. Plenty of individuals in households above the level still struggle and do not have economic security. At EPI, we publish every other year the Rhode Island Standard of Need. There should be some copies outside. I believe a link to them on your table as well. And in the Rhode Island Standard of Need report that we do, we look at what it takes for Rhode Islanders to meet their most basic needs. And then how many Rhode Islanders, how Rhode Islanders fail to have enough to meet those basic needs. And so we see on the slide here, on the right side, that for single adults without children in Rhode Island, it takes income of twice the federal poverty level just to barely make ends meet. And for single or two-parent families with two children need to earn well over twice the poverty level to make ends meet. And here we see how today's minimum wage is woefully inadequate to the task of keeping people out of poverty. The bottom line of this chart shows the federal minimum wage over the last 80 years. The top line shows what the federal minimum wage would have been had it kept pace with worker productivity over the last 50 years. You can see the big difference. If it had kept pace with worker productivity, it would be about $23 per hour now. At Rhode Island, we're at $13 per hour, going to $14 in January, $15 a year later. In Mass and Connecticut, we're already at 15, but all well under what it would have been had it kept pace. Now, to achieve economic justice, we need to understand the racial income and wealth gaps in this country. And like poverty, these are not natural phenomena. They have a history to them. In terms of wealth, most Americans build wealth through home and property ownership, and many do so through entrepreneurship. Yet many decades of redlining and ongoing differences in property valuation assessments have resulted in less wealth accumulation by Black Americans, who have also tended to have less access to capital to start and grow businesses. On this slide, using data from a recent report marking 60 years since the March on Washington, we see how little that income and wealth gaps have narrowed over the last 50 or 60 years. Only a few cents on the dollar in both cases. If we continue at this pace, closing the gap by maybe a penny on a dollar each decade on average, it will take us another 513 years to reach income equity, according to the report, and 780 years to achieve wealth equity. Now, just 2 weeks ago, we received some startling proof that poverty is indeed a policy choice. The Census Bureau released their 2022 poverty data, the supplemental poverty measure, which is somewhat different from the official poverty measure that takes into account various credits and public assistance, as well as accounting for things like regional difference that the official measure doesn't take into account. And what we learned was pretty startling and shocking, which is that last year, from 2021 to 2022, the supplemental poverty rate increased from 7.8% to 12.4% in 1 year. And for childhood poverty, it was even worse. As you can see, from 5.2 to 12.4%. More than doubled in 1 year, childhood poverty in the United States. Now, if there's any good news to see in this, is that we know why this happened. We understand the reason, and one of the key reasons was the failure of federal policymakers to extend to renew the enhanced child tax credit and other kinds of pandemic assistance enacted during the pandemic era. And so, because we know that that was a policy choice, we could have made other policy choices that did not result in this outcome. This slide shows also the supplemental poverty rate, shows how, particularly for Black and for Hispanic, Latino Americans, the poverty rate you can see dropped from 2020 to 2021 pretty significantly, but then went back up even more going into 2022. And you see the disparities, the racial and ethnic disparities exist and perhaps even increased. And what this slide shows is not percentages, but numbers of people helped by specific policies and programs, policy choices that were made. Social Security, it was 29 million people helped, not just kept out, but lifted out of poverty, and then other tax credits like the earned income tax credit, SNAP programs, school meal subsidies, housing subsidies, the cash assistance like the Rhode Island Works program. Tens of millions of Americans kept out or lifted out of poverty from these sorts of policy and program choices. So we see that economic justice is a better policy choice than poverty. And although Rhode Island has some strong policies and programs, our investment in economic justice has not been sufficient. What this chart shows is investments in the Rhode Island Works Cash Assistance Program. You see that the top bars over here are the investment of federal dollars in the millions of dollars, and the bottom darker bar is the investment of state general revenue dollars. And you see that overall over the last 25 years, there's been a decline in funding for the program, the Cash Assistance Program. But what's really noticeable is that the investment of state dollars not only declined, but went to zero a little over a decade ago, and has remained there. And something like State's Child Care Assistance Program, we spend $48 million less now each year than we spent in 2005. So it's time to reverse this disinvestment in these sorts of policies and programs. And returning here to Rhode Island's Standard of Need report, you see here how child care and health care subsidies can make the difference between a family having and not having enough to meet their most basic needs. On both the federal and state levels, we can enact policies and invest in programs that make a difference in reducing poverty. We could increase the state ITC even further than we did this year, to be closer to many of our neighbors that are at 30% or above the federal credit. We increase Rhode Island Works benefits. We could even consider creating a state child tax credit, among other options. And in order to build economic justice, we also need to make sure we have sustainable revenue sources, especially as federal pandemic assistance winds down. And this is greater tax fairness. Through this, we can generate revenue from programs that help increase fairness and equity and bring economic opportunity and justice to Rhode Islanders. So this is how you keep in touch with EPI, and I just want to close by sharing my dream of economic justice. Which I've already mentioned this report, the Rhode Island Standard of Need report, that looks at how what it takes for Rhode Islanders to make ends meet, and how too often people fall short of that. And so my dream of economic justice is that we invest and create the kinds of policies and programs that make it so that no Rhode Islander is without the means to make ends meet. And if we can get to that point, that every Rhode Islander can meet their most basic needs, then my dream is that we'll be able to say, we're no longer publishing this report because we don't need to.
So Alan's job is to get us upset. That's what he does. Get us fired up, and then we want to do something about it. So thank you for doing your job, Alan. Do we still have hope in this room after hearing all of that? Do we? Come on, people. Do we still have hope? We need to. That is the only way we change these data and these numbers around. Alan mentioned our Rhode Island Standard of Need report in his presentation. Every other year, we're not releasing it this year. This year, we are releasing a major report on the state of small businesses in Rhode Island. And we want to thank all of the many partners who are in this room who have been working with us over the last few months on this report. On your table is a QR code, because the next step is to get small business owners to participate. And so it's a QR code to surveys we will be sharing with small business owners. So please scan it for yourself or someone else you know, and we'll get the Spanish translation out in a few weeks. So stay tuned for more information on our State of Small Business report. And now, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker for today, Obanua Ambosa. The Institute of Nonprofit Practice launched their inaugural Black Leadership Institute this year, of which I'm a proud member of the first cohort. And they pulled none other than Obanua as the managing director. In addition to many other roles, she has served as the CEO of the Steve Biko Foundation, Executive Director of the Harvard University Center for African Studies, Senior Consultant with Good Works International. She is currently a Senior Fellow with the Atlantic Institute at Oxford University, an alumna of the Atlantic Fellowship for Racial Equity. And if that's not enough, she is also pursuing her doctorate degree. Her accolades are endless. Yet, it is her guiding ethos that we pulled upon today when we extended the invitation. That collectively, individuals, teams, and communities have the resources necessary to develop and achieve a vision that produces better outcomes for all. She knows deeply the power of imagination and new perspectives to unlock potential. And she is here today to enact the dream of economic justice with us. Help me give a warm Rhode Island welcome to Obanua.
Good morning. It is good to see you all. Now guys, I grew up in the Black church. So what that means is like when I say something, I need you to say something back. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning. Much better. You all are quick learners. We're going to get a lot done today. Let me first start off by acknowledging Wayona and her leadership. I have the good pleasure of working with her, Shondell, Mary Harrison, as well as the Institute of Nonprofit Practice. We are also joined by some of our colleagues from IMP. Wave your hands, let the people see you. We're joined by Warren Brandon, Alec Levine, and Audrey Gillis. While IMP is very much a national organization, we're also very much locally rooted in local communities, and Providence is one of the places that we've been the longest, and where we have developed just that, a sense of community that helps to support, guide, and nurture leaders at all stages of their career. Now, let me just also confess, I am super happy to be here today. For one reason, I'm avoiding my trainer. Did you guys see that I struggled a little bit up the stairs? Yeah, let's just say this gave me a good reason to flee the gym this morning. But I'm also really excited to be here because Rhode Island is such an interesting place. You know, often when people talk about Rhode Island, they talk about it as a small place, right? But I don't think they realize that it's also a dynamic place where many interesting things have happened over the years. I was also excited to be invited to speak here today because the theme of the conference alone, igniting the dream of economic progress in Rhode Island. It's not often that the hard stuff of economics is paired with the soft skill of dreaming. But it's my view that it's in these unusual pairings where new ideas and new realities are born. I was also happy to be here and to come to Providence today, because guys, I like fashion. And you all are a good-looking audience. But also two of my favorites are from Rhode Island. Viola Davis, of course, one of the greatest actresses of the generation, is from Rhode Island. And then a lesser-known fact, anyone familiar with Andre Leon Talley? He passed away recently. One of my favorite fashionistas, also studied at Brown University. And these are really just two of the cultural producers that have been shaped by this very special place. Not only has the state produced generations of artistic talent, but Rhode Island has been a protagonist and many of the United States' most salient policy issues, from its founding on religious freedom to the early, although unenforced, prohibition of slavery. In tracing the history of Rhode Island, we can trace many aspects of the nation's story, including its contradictions and contestations. Perhaps one of the starkest contradictions is that Rhode Island is home to the gorgeous mansions of the Gilded Age, structures that testify to the prosperity, for some, of America's industrial age. But this is a somewhat ironic characterization, given that throughout its history, Newport has largely been a working and middle-class city. In fact, today, according to the Newport Historical Society, the City by the Sea, as it's named, has the largest number of low-income housing units in the state. And this is really the issue that brings us here today, and the one that I'd like to spend my time with you exploring. Economic inequality. I mean, Alan did his job and made us real mad. But also to talk about what are we going to do about it. But let me also acknowledge that in some ways I'm preaching to the proverbial choir. There are many places you could have been today on a rainy Friday morning, guys. I mean, this was commitment to come out in the rain, right? But you chose to be here. Your presence alone is an indicator of your commitment to changing the status quo. It's an indicator that you believe in the promise and the potential of dreams. If you didn't believe in the possibility of economic change, you would have gotten up extra early this morning, put on your super cute outfit, and made your way down to the mayor, as you did. And for that, we celebrate and we appreciate you. The question then isn't whether we believe that economic inequality, for all of the reasons we've heard this morning, is a relevant and necessary issue to address. The question is whether our dream for economic progress is big enough. And if there's one thing you take away from my remarks today, it would be to dream bigger. Dream bigger. I began to ask myself what my dream for justice and equity was back in my student days at Boston University. Do we have any other BU grads here? Woo! Okay, go Terriers. We love to see it. I was an intern in what billed itself as an international human rights organization, although a small fledgling one. As one of the interns, I think I made up about 25% of the staff. So I remember drafting a proposal one day and sitting with my boss as he reviewed it. And when he came across the word eradicate, he crossed it out, saying that he hated that word. It made it sound as if we were exterminators talking about termites. Part of me, you know, the part of me that was heading to her junior year of college and needed that meager paycheck, laughed at my boss's joke. Because, you know, I saw a career-limiting move when I recognized one. Right? But the rest of me was bewildered. I was bewildered, so much so that I broke out my thesaurus. And if you remember, you know, I'm at that point where I think, technically speaking, I'm getting maybe a little bit to middle age, yeah? And so many of you will know the thesaurus as that very convenient keyboard function, you know, Shift F7, it pops up. Who here remembers when the thesaurus was the size of a small child? Like you had to go get that, like when you were going to look at the thesaurus, you were committed to the cause. And on that day, I was committed to the cause. I went to look at what the word eradicate, what other substitutes were. And as I suspected, eradicate, which means to destroy completely or put an end to, the synonyms were to expunge, eliminate, and to my boss's point, exterminate. But rather than going with any of these terms, it was deemed that the more appropriate word choice was alleviate, which means to make suffering or problem less severe. And this exchange made me begin to ask a fundamental question. As people concerned with justice and equity, what is our goal? Is it simply to minimize suffering, or is it to fundamentally alter the contradictions that are causing that suffering? Think about it. When people are sick, what do we say to them? Feel better. Get well soon. We don't say, I hope you feel less sick tomorrow. And if you do, you might just be a terrible person. This is a non-judgmental space. In the same vein, when you go to feed your loved ones, at the end of the meal, you don't say, are you less hungry? You say, are you full? When we speak to communities that have been marginalized and excluded, and we ask them what they want, they don't say they want to be less excluded, they want to be included. Not only to have a seat at the table, but to shape the table, what goes on at the table, the conversations at the table. True inclusion. Yet, when it comes to poverty, we seem to be conditioned to settle, to pursue alleviation instead of eradication. There seems to be the general sentiment that poverty is just one of those things we must live with. In fact, if like me, as I said, I grew up as a church girl, shout out to Beyonce, anyone recognize those lyrics? If you've heard, and yes, I will find a way to bring Beyonce to every. I'm not on her staff yet, but if somebody knows somebody, make it happen. But if you grew up in church like me, you might have heard this scripture quoted often: the poor will always be with us.
Well.
But I've wondered if the poor will always be with us because of some cosmic inevitability or because of our willingness to change our priorities.
Amen.
I like that. Next Sunday. Let me also pause here and say that my comments are by no means meant to diminish the many years of work and commitment that so many people over the years have contributed to pursuing economic justice, both in this room and without. Progress has been made, and the data that has been shared here this morning suggests that we need to do more, and we need to do it urgently. Some may hear me and think, we're doing the best we can. We need to be realistic. Change doesn't happen overnight. And this is in many ways true. We live and work within systems and structures that sometimes seem immovable and intractable. Change can seem impossible, or that it'll take 10 lifetimes, or to the data that was just presented, 500 years. The other reality, though, is that daily we are surrounded by and utilize things that were once deemed impossible. From flying to the internet to digital banking, things that 120, let alone 30 and 20 years ago seemed to be the stuff of sci-fi are now our norms. And this is the case socially as well. It is not lost to me that as a Black woman who is the child of immigrants, 70 years ago, I couldn't have voted in this country. I wouldn't be standing at this podium. In fact, it wouldn't be legal in many places in the country for me to address an audience. This mixed-race audience wouldn't even have been legal. There has been change, and there has been progress, and there can be more, as long as we prioritize it. So many of the things that we take for granted as normal and necessary parts of our lives now have not always existed. A few of them were named this morning, from the 40-hour work week to maternity leave to child labor laws. The creation of all of these things that are now norms were policy decisions. They came into being to address the needs of the times and to ensure the well-being of people. This is not to say that they were perfect and they don't need to be expanded, but they exist because choices were made, and we can continually make choices to improve them. As community members, leaders, and policymakers, the fundamental question we must ask ourselves is whether the current economic policies are adequately addressing the needs of communities. From what has been shared this morning, the answer is an unequivocal no. As rates of childhood poverty rise, we continue to see that the face of poverty is gendered and racialized. The temptation may be to lament that this is the way it has always been, and to work within the same policy frameworks and constraints of our current context, to take a gradualist approach. But I would argue that rather than settling or going slowly or monitoring step-by-step progress, I would argue that in the words of Thomas Sankara, we must dare to invent the future. Does anyone by any chance know who Thomas Sankara is? As was shared, I have a background in African studies, so you're always going to get a pinch of that. But Sankara was the former president of Burkina Faso, who was assassinated in 1987. He only spent 4 years in office before he was killed, and like most legacies, Sankara's is not a simple one by any stretch of the imagination. He was an imperfect leader governing in imperfect circumstances. Can anybody relate to that? Imperfect leaders, imperfect circumstances. Sankara led Burkina Faso, a small country in West Africa. And when he came to office in 1983, his country, which was still known by its colonial name of Upper Volta, was the poorest nation in the world. Please hear me, not one of the poorest, not among the poorest, it was the poorest. You know, when you look at the UNDP ratings, like it was at the very bottom, consistently. And please note that this is not the perfect analogy. Today, Burkina Faso continues to face economic, environmental, and political challenges, as do many places in the world. But the change they managed to facilitate in 4 short years was nothing short of extraordinary. Sankara was a visionary who not only advocated for gender equity, he planted 10 million trees to address climate change long before it was common practice. Within weeks, his government vaccinated 2.5 million children. We've had recent experiences of what it takes to get folks vaccinated. We know it's not easy, and this was in a time before the internet, before cell phones, landlines weren't in every home. I mean, this was a get out the vaccine effort, or they called upon what I like to refer to as a homegirl hotline, right? This was community coming together to make it happen. But perhaps the most impressive thing about Sankara's presidency, among many other impressive things, is that when he entered office in 1983, the national literacy rate was 13%. 13 out of 100 people were able to read. In a room this size, that would be about 39 of us who have the gift of literacy. 4 years later, the literacy rate was 73%. That part. Now, if you're like me, you're probably wondering how the poorest country in the world managed to achieve all of that and increase its GDP so it no longer held that dubious distinction. How did Sankara manage to lead so much change in such a short period of time? I would argue that there are 3 key things that we can learn from his example that enabled the country to make such rapid progress, and that if we were to adopt them, they would enable us to fundamentally shift how we address poverty. These are less policy propositions, because the truth is, you all have done the work. You know the answer. We've seen what works, what doesn't work. There are a million policy propositions out there for us to pick from at this time. But these 3 C's, as I call them, speak more to our mindset and the way in which we do this work. And I think the number one thing that is required if we're going to facilitate significant change in a short period of time is a compelling vision. The first thing Sankara did when he got into office was to call together a group of people to change the name of the country. At that point, it was still referred to by its colonial French name, Upper Volta, which indicated that, it was by the top of the Volta River, right? It was less an identity and more, GPS for back then, right? Instead, Sankara came through and renamed it Burkina Faso, which in local languages means the land of upright people, the land of incorruptible people. And in so doing, he put forward a compelling vision of self-reliance, of agency, and identity, one that was shaped and co-created by the people around him. If we go back to my earlier analogy, most of us don't want to go to a dinner party where the host says, you'll leave less hungry. We want to go to a dinner party that is abundant, that is generous, and where we are challenged and engaged by our hosts. The second C, after we develop and articulate this compelling vision, is collaboration. The truth is we can't, but we also don't have to do it alone. Fulfilling a new vision will take new types of alliances. Often it's easier and more intuitive to partner with people and organizations who hold the same views and perspectives. But an expansive vision will require expansive relationships. The work ahead of us requires that we begin to build partnerships with some of the unusual suspects who have the same goals, but who may have different perspectives, experiences, zip codes, and approaches. And again, to achieve remarkable change in 4 years, there was not one segment of society that Sankara did not engage, from the illiterate market woman and informal traders, to the captain of their very small industry, to religious leaders. Everyone had a seat at the table. And then the last thing we must do is to calculate the cost. Now, typically when we talk about policy, we talk about how much implementation will cost. I'm suggesting that we calculate a different type of cost, that we calculate the cost of not doing it. When we get tired, when the coalition building wears on us, and the temptation to revert to the status quo becomes overwhelming, we must think about the cost of not pursuing the expansive vision. What will be lost if we fail to realize the dream of economic justice? And when we have calculated the cost and remembered it is much too high a price to pay, that the Viola Davises, the Andre Leon Callies require that we do something different. We must also remember that as leaders, as policymakers, as community members, we can go beyond responding to the status quo. We can remember instead that we must dare to invent the future. Thank you.
I wish I wasn't up on queue and another organization was hosting because I needed to sit down and take all that in. Thank you. Collective vision, collaboration, calculating the cost. We have our action steps laid out for us. And I think we can do it with the people in this room and outside this room that didn't make it here today. If you are left feeling inspired as I am, Benoit, let's take a pause now and share some dreams and hope. And you can wait until the end, you don't have to do it now, but I needed a pause, so you may need to as well. And we can take that pause as we get ready for some panelists to add to that, to respond to that. And I'm really excited about this, especially the first group of panelists. I'm a little biased, but this first group of panelists, when we think of the future, we have to start with them. We have amazing youth leaders, and then we have some good trouble community leaders here as well. I would now like to call up Divya Nair, EPI Policy Director, not yet, Nina Johnson, Policy Analyst, who is working on paid leave, childcare, public supports, and a million other economic justice issues to introduce what we are calling our Dreamers Panel. Divya.
Hello, everyone. It's still morning, yes, that's great. So the Dreamers panel is made up of young people who are passionate about their communities. The panelists will talk about their dreams and hopes for Rhode Island, as we've been mentioning throughout this conference, as well as the policy changes that will make this a reality. We will highlight the unique perspectives that youth bring to advocacy, organizing, and policy spaces. And I want to introduce our moderator for this panel, Representative David Morales, who is a community advocate and state representative for Rhode Island House District 7 in Providence. Rep. Morales is the youngest Latino to ever serve in any state legislative in the country, and he was sworn in at the age of 22.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Divya. My mom would be very proud. So hey y'all, hope you're all having a nice morning, because I look around this room and I see a diverse array of community leaders. And I cannot think of a better way to start off and kick off a Friday. So I have the pleasure, the honor, and the privilege of being able to moderate this Dreamers panel. So one by one, I'm going to call on our panelists who are going to make their way up, and I would ask that you give them all a big round of applause and match their energy. So first, we have Marion Cava. She is a senior at Woonsocket Public Schools and the Vice President of Silence is Violence, a youth-led organization. Next, we have Marco Lima. Marco is a graduate of Providence Public Schools and currently serves as the co-chair of the Board for Young Voices. Our next panelist, you have already met, Divya Nair, who is the policy analyst at Economic Progress Institute. And I cannot tell you enough how consistent and clutch she has been throughout the legislative session. Anytime there was a research request or a question, she was on top of it. And that takes me to our next panelist, Sylvia Perot, a peer support specialist at Foster Forward, where she works directly with youth experiencing homelessness. And lastly, we have Cariana Bone. She is a senior at PCTA and the lead advocacy organizer at the youth-led organization Outrage. Now, before we begin our panel, I have to take a quick survey, and I say this with all the kindness in my heart. Please raise your hand if you are over the age of 25. I think it is safe to say that well over 90% of the room just raised their hand. So with that being said, I'm going to ask that you take note as to what our young leaders are about to speak on. Specifically, as relates to their lived experience and their perspectives on organizing, advocacy, and policy decision making. And I also just want to emphasize that what you see in front of you is not necessarily the future. They are the present. So in whichever order we want to kick things off for the Dreamers panel, my first question for our panelists is, what community services or programs do you see making a big difference in your community on a daily basis that you believe would benefit from increased investments and funding?
That was a lot heavier than I expected. Hello everyone, my name is Marco. As David Morales mentioned, I use he, him pronouns. Also want to clarify, I'm no longer co-chair of the board. That is Wujida. I stepped down as I graduated. And yeah, I just want to honor my fellow youth leader. But one thing I really want to highlight in this is after-school programs as a form of investment, not only in the present, but for our future as well. When we think of after-school programs, you think about the YMCA, but you can also think about workforce development, you can think about college access, and for me especially, this was important. I now go to Brown University, which is very hard to get into school. Without the access I had to all these after-school programs like Breakthrough Providence, like Young Voices, who really allowed me to see myself in a position that is dominated by white people. You don't really see people of color in these schools and these institutions. They allowed me to dream, and they allowed me to see a future where I can now get the education that I deserve, and the education that not many people can afford as well. So yeah, and then also on the adult aspect of things, after-school programs really offer a space where children can go and not have to worry about how to get home. Parents can continue working and not have to worry like, oh shoot, I have to miss hours of work to go pick up my child. And I know like one thing, even in my own family, that we often had to discuss was if my mom were to work, who was gonna pick me up after school? And like, how was I gonna get home when like taking the bus wasn't necessarily like an option for me? And just like all these complex decisions that we have to make as a family can be alleviated by after schools. So last year, there was the Boost Bill, which I believe did not pass. And I highly encourage legislators in the room to take a look at that bill and really raise it up this legislative season. That offered so much funding to after-school programs, and by bringing that bill back into this legislative season, we're gonna see huge change, and also just an investment. We're gonna see that money back. We already see that money back when we think about programs like Prepare RI. So really just focus on what do you want, and I think our last speaker did an amazing job at this. But what are you going to lose by not investing? That's what we're doing.
Hold us accountable, Marco. Thank you for those comments. There's another panelist who, again, would like to answer, what community services or programs do you see making a big difference in your communities that you think would benefit from increased funding and investments?
I'll add on to this. So community services that I see that would need way more investment in my community specifically and in other lower income communities as well is Community Care Alliance in Woonsocket. They focus a lot on the homeless population that we have, and they provide resources such as healthcare, how to look for job trainings and stuff of that sort. The Harbor Youth Center, which focuses on youth employment and development. It's a program that I usually go to after school when I have questions about employment or what to do after college. After high school, sorry, when it comes to going to college, because sometimes my high school doesn't really focus on that. Milagros Project, which focuses on mutual aid and community engagement. They have a lot of resource events, such as having food and clothing drives, Narcan training, which is important. I feel like the services that focus on mutual aid and community engagement needs to be funded more, just because our communities are impoverished and don't have that mutual support from our policymakers sometimes. So it's the community members that are left to have to do that work in our communities. Without having the funding from our policymakers, our community members are left wondering, how are we going to make this happen? How are we going to make this possible? And I've had experience with that as well, being the vice president for Silence is Violence 401. Our main focus is literally mutual aid and community engagement. We do things such as poetry night, Woonsocket Day Play, that kind of gives that resource to young athletes in Rhode Island. Having a village vigil to kind of like feel what's going on in the community forums, and food and clothing drives. We always focus on where are we going to get the funding from, where are we going to get the money from, because sometimes our policymakers in our communities don't really listen to us and hear us. So when we push and when we advocate, that's when we get the change happening in our communities, because nobody makes change in our communities except for the community members themselves. I feel like just close that out, I feel like having an increased investment in our community organizations will also bridge the gap between community members, policymakers, and politicians. Investing into our community organizations will build a connection with our policymakers, investors, and community members, so we won't have to focus on where are we going to get the money from, or how is more going to be like, where are we going to do with the money that we have now, and what change can we do, because money is not a problem. It's what's going on in the community that's a problem.
So moving on to our next question, which I'm especially excited and a little bit biased about, because I've seen some of y'all at the State House, the realms of City Hall, and just at the picket lines, protesting and organizing. I'm curious to know, as young advocates for changes in your community, what has your advocacy experience been like? Specifically, what would you highlight, but what would you also reference as challenges in that experience?
Okay, I guess not. Hello everyone, my name is Sylvia Burrell. I'm a drop-in peer support specialist at Foster Forward, which serves youth that are homeless or experiencing housing instability that have experienced foster care. I also have lived experience, a total of 5 years in the Rhode Island foster care system. When I think about my advocacy journey, it started in 2021, shortly after I aged out of the foster care system. I really don't know how I got involved in advocacy. It just kind of happened. It started with Foster Club. Some challenges that I have seen throughout my advocacy journey is there's a lot of tokenism. You know, it's great to bring lived experts in the room, but what are you doing with what they're telling you? Like, writing what they say down on a piece of paper and posting it on the website is not progressive to me. It's tokenism. And I don't see enough lived experts in the rooms, especially when it's decision making, and that to me is a huge red flag. So I would say my advocacy journey definitely has been a great one. I've made so many connections and I'm so grateful, but there's a long way to go.
Hello. So my advocacy experience, it has been very eye-opening, especially since I'm fairly new to it. I've only started really advocating and speaking my truth like about a year or so ago since I joined Arise. That is where I learned to fully feel confident in what I say, how I say it, and who I'm saying it to really make an impact on what's going on in the community. I feel challenged because I feel like maybe it isn't enough. Like the supports, or I feel like I don't see enough progress. So like that's something to really I've overcome since I've been working a lot on campaign work, especially ethnic studies, and trying to get that into Providence Public Schools. I've worked with, like, it's a coalition, and I've worked with other youth organizations and their youth to talk to, like, the people in the equity office about getting it into our, like, curriculum in schools. So I feel like it's been very progressive in a way as in, like, it's developed me to really speak about that.
Yeah, adding on to that, so I'm a part of a collaborative called the Anti-Racist Education Collaborative, partnered by Rhode Island Kids Count, and then Arise, PSU, Youth in Action, Young Voices, also CLEAN. So it's a big network, intergenerational, and for me at least, and especially when I'm in that space, it's kind of a moment of frustration when we're talking about advocacy. We say a lot of these things, and kind of like what you're saying as well, we're tokenized a lot of the time. We have these good ideas, helpful ideas, and then they're like, oh, I'm gonna write that down. And then what are you doing after that? Not really anything. For example, and I'm gonna give a clear example of this. When we're talking about SROs, and I think, for those that don't know, those are school resource officers, and a lot of the time we talk about how are we gonna get the funding for things? How are we gonna afford these huge implementation of programs? And this comes up a lot when we're talking about mental health professionals in schools, but every single year that I've been in advocacy work, I've seen a different SRO implementation bill, and the students in the schools are outwardly saying, we don't like them, they're not helpful. And I think it was especially funny last legislative season, because we were in the testimony room, we're testifying against these bills, and one of the legislators, instead of saying, as POC, I hear you, I see you, well, they were white, but still, as like people of color that are speaking out here are spending their day after school when they should be doing homework here in our state house, like testifying against SROs, what I'm gonna tell you is that my white child is having an amazing experience with theirs. They're having lunch together, they're really like having a fun time. While what we see in our schools, or what I've heard, because I was privileged enough not to go to a school with SROs, what we've heard is that students are getting beaten, they're getting yelled at, they're getting abused in a variety of ways, but we're still talking about implementing more, because that's the solution. Instead, what we should be talking about is mental health professionals, and that same funding, that's going to SROs can go to helping our teachers understand what mental health is for their own sake, but also for their students' sake, getting more mental health professionals, because right now, I don't know the current statistics, but in one of my readings, I think it was like 1 per 375 students. That's not enough. We're gonna spend weeks until we get the mental health support that we need, and we can't afford to have weeks on that. That's when we see students not going to school. That's when we see students like harming themselves. So the solutions are there, and we're talking about the solutions. And I think that's the frustrating component of all this, because there's always a way to deflect it. So I think what we're gonna talk about more, of course, is just how to hold yourselves accountable when you're in these spaces of privilege, but don't understand, like, aren't doing enough to support it. And there are some amazing people, even in this room, and for those I don't know, I'm not talking about you necessarily, but if you resonate with it, maybe you should do a little bit more.
So I think I wanted to kick off on like do a little bit more. I think for me, definitely as a teenager, I was never in advocacy space. It only kind of started once I was in college and decided my career trajectory. And so I would request of you all to be mentors for the young people in your life. I think that was something I really struggled with, was like, how can I do this work? I'm starting off empty. I don't know anyone who's in advocacy. And during my experience at EPI, I have been challenged to do networking, which I hate. I'm going to love. I've been challenged to be in leadership programs, and that is something I would group like. That would be my call to action to you all, is challenge the young people in your life to do this work because they want to. It's just a little bit scary sometimes, I would say.
Thank you all so much for sharing. And Marco, I remember being in that committee room when that comment was made and just feeling that secondhand frustration, seeing the faces of all those young students who had taken the time out of their day to be there only to be met with that response. But that's why it's important that you all continue to have that presence at the State House. So this next question, y'all have already started answering to an extent, so I'm excited to hear the full answer. What do you think current policymakers and or advocates are currently missing in their decision-making process?
Okay, so I feel like they're missing people in the community during their decision-making processes. I feel like it's appropriate to have at least one community representative at the table with policymakers to ensure that the needs of the community members are being met. Because a lot of times we have policymakers and politicians in office who don't represent the community that they're supposed to be representing. They're not in the community. They're not actually living in the real community where they're supposed to be like making policies for. Like they'll be living like suburbia while their actual low-income residents are struggling to meet ends meet and they're living in a food desert. And they'll pass bills or laws that only like represent or benefit 10% or less of the community. So it's like we also need youth representatives at the table as well because, like you said, we're the present now. We're also going to be the future and be the ones taking over what policymakers are deciding for us. So I feel like having a youth voice and making sure that our needs are being met, but also community members is really important as well.
Hello. So I think what is missing again is lived experience, but also to add on to that, I think accountability is also missing as well. You know, if people in power, you know, have a duty to serve a certain population and they fail that population, that accountability needs to be there. And what I've seen through my advocacy journey is that there's a serious lack of accountability. You know, things just get swept under the rug. And when it comes to foster care, you know, it's not just a job, you're managing someone's life. So you should be taking it seriously. You know, the decisions you make affect that young person, and it could affect them in many different ways, and it could be long term. So I think accountability needs to be raised a lot more often.
To expand on what everyone else has been saying, I feel like the significance of youth voices in general is really missing. I feel like we progress more when we involve the youth, writing testimonies, hearing what they want. And even with that, we're still ignoring and pushing it aside because they're young. I feel like a lot of us are, especially like high schoolers, or just like developing more and are able to really know what we want. But when we do say what we want or what we need, it's not really valid because of our age. So I feel like you really need to see it from younger people's perspectives instead of adult perspectives, because things like that also like correspond with us as well.
I adding on to that, because a lot of this is theoretical in a sense. Like, it's kind of hard to imagine, like, oh, how do we give students power? And I know that sounds weird, but like, it's kind of hard to imagine a world where we are. But there are already state leaders doing this, and I want to uplift, obviously, Rep. Morales, because last year we actually went through the process of writing a piece of legislation together as the Anti-Racist Education Collaborative. We researched and developed a piece of legislation that would allow the student co-chair, I believe, it's been a long time, guys, the student co-chair on the board of primary and secondary education to have full voting rights. This has been done in other states, so it's not nuanced. Rhode Island is just a little slow in getting there. And it was actually an amazing process to have Rep. Morales sit with us and actually hear us out. For a lot of us, this was like opening a can of worms because we weren't used to this process. So we were like, oh, what about if we remove suspensions? What about if we add restorative practices? What if we do this? What if we do that? And obviously we had to go down to one goal, or I believe a couple goals, but still, it was just so welcoming, and I think like a powerful experience to see all of us get together and be able to talk to one of our representatives. Also, to other people I want to uplift, Senator Cano and Senator Karen Mack, they also do an amazing job of just speaking to the crowd. Because that's another issue. A lot of us can't afford to waste time talking to someone and maybe not having anything happen, especially for like people that work, having to say, oh, I just got out of my job, now I have to go to this meeting. I don't know if anything's gonna happen, but I'm just gonna sit there. Maybe food's not even provided. There's these little things that really make a key difference when you're talking to people, and especially low-income communities, because we're not really in a position to say, yeah, I wanna go to this fun meeting. Like, you know, and then another thing is just the lack of translation in a lot of these meetings is seriously important. I know, like, I do a lot of multilingual advocacy, and a lot of the times we're discussing multilingual policies without interpretation. So there's these little things that we don't think about, but are so important when you're thinking about how to change society.
Very good job.
Thank you all so much. Marco, I cannot say it again, that piece of legislation was without question like one of my favorite moments in the legislature, even if it was held for further study. And I also want to just recognize my Senate sponsor, Val Lawson, who introduced it on her side. And very similarly, we had committee hearings, we had young people come out and share their voices. So rest assured, it will be reintroduced, and we're going to work towards passage. And speaking of legislation and policy decisions, when we think about the policies that city leaders and state leaders should be considering, specifically as it relates to the stage you are in your life, where you are preparing to transition, some of you are going to be graduating from high school, making that transition to college, some of you are going to be moving out of your parents' home and living on your own. What policy priorities do you think need to be put into place to improve the cost and standard of living in Rhode Island, especially as you prepare to make that transition to live on your own?
Alright, I'm gonna always bring it back to paid leave. If anyone knows me, they know I talk about paid leave every day. So Rhode Island has a paid leave program, and it has been incredible for the people who are able to afford it, because it's a huge cut on your paycheck if you do. And for someone like me, in my mid-20s, if I ever have children, that's something that I can use, right? But if I'm a single parent, if I'm someone who's working the minimum wage, I cannot afford this program that has been so critical for working families, for expanding families, for people who are taking care of their elderly parents. So that's something, you know, I'm currently advocating for. Two of the sponsors are here, Senator Lawson and Rep. Diaz. And I think it's something that when we think of the standard of living, we think of these programs that aren't necessarily things like the minimum wage, which is definitely important, but something that we use as a safety net, as something that we can rely on for our future planning.
Okay, this question is difficult. I would like to uplift post-secondary education. So a couple months ago, I went to DC, to Capitol Hill, to learn about the Journey to Success campaign. If you don't know what the Journey to Success campaign, I would highly recommend you look it up. There's just not enough time to explain it. But one of the things they focus on is Chafee. And Chafee funding is funding for youth that are either in foster care or have exited. And Chafee funding also can help with, you know, post-secondary education. But what I find is that a lot of the clients that I work with, it's not that they don't want to go to college, it's the trauma that they've endured so far. Their spirits are not there, it's broken, and a lot of the times, you know, we don't know what they went through while they were in care. They could have been thrown in multiple different homes, but Chafee cuts off at a certain age. I believe the age is 25. So if you have a youth that ages out at 21 and then is doing trauma work and therapy, you know, by the time that they're done, they're not going to have enough time to focus on their education. And if more youth got their degrees and more post-secondary education, we would see less youth in jail, we would see less poverty. It's just one thing that helps the other. So what I would like to see is more focus on post-secondary education because it's important.
And going on that, like you briefly mentioned mental health, and that's super important. And I think expanding medical insurance to include mental health providers and just mental health support in general as a preventative measure instead of as a specialty. Because if we're being honest, if you're getting mental health when you're already really bad, well, mental health support when you're already in a really bad place, it can be too late for some people. So really making sure that you're targeting people before it even gets bad. And honestly, like we think about mental health and we only think about disorders like depression or anxiety, but mental health can also just be like having really bad days and not knowing how to speak on that. I think coming from a Hispanic household, it's always so hard to talk about feelings, and getting mental health support is just a way to learn those. It's a way to understand, like, and not necessarily for my family, but like for other people, that violence isn't an answer for everything. And I know we learned this in kindergarten, but it doesn't really stick. And like that's why we see a lot of violence in a lot of communities, because they don't understand why they feel this and how they can like let it out. And then another thing is just increasing the minimum wage. A statistic that I wrote down while the presentation was going on is that the federal, the federal minimum wage should be $23 an hour in comparison to the work. And while we do have a plan in place to go to $15 an hour in Rhode Island, I don't think that's enough. Because if we look at housing, the housing market, if we look at the housing market or just how much we spend on food alone, $13 an hour is not going to cover it. And that's why we see so many people kind of in dense populations, because we're having to live together. We're having to support one another. And if we don't, then there's that situation where we're living paycheck to paycheck and thinking, how can I ration like a cereal box? Or how can I ration this food till the end of the month or till I get my next paycheck? And I don't, like, this is gonna sound crazy and very radical, but I don't think we should live like that. I think we should have the ability to say, I wanna save up for maybe a nice day off, or I should be able to have a vacation when I'm not feeling the best. Like, there's these little things, and I don't mean vacation as in go to like California. I mean vacation as in like rest in my room and be able to read a book, or be able to not worry about the next big thing that's going to come up.
So I didn't preface it for this question, but this was the one where y'all should have been taking the notes, all right? Because they literally just outlined the plan as to how we actually support young people, and quite frankly, our communities as a whole. So for this last question, before we shift over to Q&A from the audience, I'm going to kindly ask that each panelist take a turn to answer. What are your hopes and dreams for socioeconomic justice in Rhode Island?
Okay, I'll start. So I kind of have a few answers to this question. So the first one would be access to basic needs. Every community should be receiving essential and clean resources such as food, housing, education, and healthcare. Families shouldn't be worrying about turning on their faucet and seeing black water come down their drains, wondering if it's safe to drink or even bathe in. Communities like my own, like Woonsocket, should be considered a food desert. We should have a supermarket at every community. People should be having access to healthy and affordable fruits, vegetables in general, and like without worrying about the cost. Like we mentioned before, in low-income communities, there is 21.2% more to buy groceries at Stop and Shop compared to a higher income community, which I find crazy to me, but you know. Another dream would also be nobody would be sleeping out in cold weather, but of course the dream is not reality. Instead of adding chairs in our parks that are anti-homeless, that have that little bar in the middle where homeless people cannot lay down on the bench, we should be having more policies that protect our homeless community. For example, creating a bill or policy where homeless people should not be outside past a certain temperature. I think people forget that homeless people are people too. So it's important for them to be in a warm, safe place during cold times and hot times as well to prevent death or other health crisis. This one that I'm going to talk about is kind of personal to me. Access to equal education work. So where a community's economic background should not really play a role in how much money is being put into schools and children's education. My freshman year in high school, while still living in Woonsocket, I attended an out-of-district school called Cumberland High School. At Cumberland, I literally received the best education I've ever received in my 12 or 13 years of being in high school education now. So at Cumberland, they literally had all the resources and funding to make sure students were equipped with basic skills and needed to succeed. They had new books and materials. They had updated and advanced curriculums. They had requirements such as financial literacy and art. While at Cumberland, I became financially literate, while my classmates at Woonsocket still are financially illiterate. I feel like Cumberland exposed all their students to different resources, and while at Cumberland, I was visibly able to see that my teachers enjoyed the job. While my whole time at Cumberland, I didn't have any other teacher. I had that one main teacher, and that was it. And to note, in the 2021 year, it was reported that the median income in Cumberland was $104,613, and I attended Cumberland during the 2020-2021 school year. Returning back to Woonsocket for the 2021 school year of August, my sophomore year, I noticed a difference in materials, education, environment. And since my sophomore year, I had multiple classes where I had repeated teachers leaving in and out, not enjoying their job, not enjoying where they're at. And students still to this day don't know about things such as financial literacy, which I feel like is insane. Like everyone should be financially literate coming out of high school. And it's important to note that in 2021, the reported median income for Woonsocket was $48,822. As you can tell, that's a big difference. And that was seen in the school system. And I definitely say, lastly, the reevaluation of our police and criminal justice reform. My dream would be that we address the systematic racism here in Rhode Island. Systematic racism is everywhere, but it's so prominent in Rhode Island, but people ignore that. I feel like there's been so many cases where law enforcement have been using excessive force against our community members instead of restorative practices. And when our community members speak out, they're ignored or they're even bigger targets thrown on their backs. I feel like we should reevaluate our police training and incorporate training such as non-bias, making sure that we're having police in our communities for the right reasons. We should have trainings that target what Marco talks about a lot, mental health crisis and mental health resources. when you're approaching someone during a mental health crisis, you don't know how they're going to act, but I feel like our police should be aware of that without being so safe to pull out their gun or anything of that sort. I would also definitely say I would love to see officers who reflect the communities that they're put into. When you have an officer from suburbia put into a low-income community, they're like, what the heck is going on? Like, they don't know how to respond to that community. So having someone in that community who looks like the people in the community kind of closes that gap between our community members and police. And my last hope would definitely be for the youth in Rhode Island training schools to have a mentorship program where they come out of that training school program, they're not committing the same crimes that put them into that school. That mentorship program would provide consistency and support in their lives, something that they so lack. And a lot of those kids in those training schools are kids coming from the foster system or kids who are in group homes. So how can we provide for them and how can we support them?
I would just like to first, that was amazing, thank you. I would like to add on to that. So I think we talked about progress over the years, and I think it's really interesting. I lived in Cumberland for 6 years. I actually went to Cumberland High School. It was a little different when I was there. A little different. The curriculum was great, but there really wasn't a lot of awareness around diversity. So, you know, Cumberland, certain parts are very diverse, but some areas are not. So when you have that all together, it can get a little dicey. But to hear that there has been progress makes me really happy. My hope for economic justice is also basic needs being met, but also awareness around resources. You know, there are resources out there, but a lot of these youth don't know about it. Like a lot of my clients don't even know that there's a homeless bill of rights. I hand them out to them when they come in, and that's sad that they're experiencing homelessness and they don't even know their rights. So basic needs is also another thing. I really would like to see less youth coming into the drop-in center. Not because I don't want them to come in, but because they shouldn't have to come in. They shouldn't have to come in asking for food. You know, what do? I have health insurance, but it doesn't cover this. Like, it's sad, and I'm trying not to get emotional, but I really want to see these basic needs met for these youth because, you know, they've already been traumatized, and most of them are young, and instead of enjoying their years as a teenager and as a youth, they're worrying about where they're going to sleep at night, what they're going to eat, and they don't get their youth back. That's not something they should be worrying about as 17, 18, 19. They should be enjoying themselves.
So my answer would be financial freedom for all of us. And when I say all of us, I mean specifically the people that aren't in the room right now. I want to assume that if you're here, it's because you're in a position where you're stable enough, you know? You're able to come to these meetings and not have to worry about work, unless you're here for work, then that's different. But then I also want to go back to the point you mentioned about criminal justice reform. Recently, this past year, I was trained in restorative justice. And while in these trainings, we were talking about the criminal justice system and how broken it is. When we think about it, our state is paying so much money to criminalize our youth, when in reality, we can spend that same amount of money, although significantly less, but we could spend that same amount of money and give restorative not trainings, but restorative practices and implement them to a point where our students, and I'm saying students because at the end of the day, they're still students. They're still learning how to be a human, how to be alive, as we all are. But these students, instead of being criminalized and having to live their life in a prison and then leave not knowing what is going on in the world, they can leave understanding, first off, I did something wrong. Second of all, I'm going to talk to the person that I did harm to, and how can we bridge that gap so that both people feel satisfied. And then third off, that they get the resources that they need, because oftentimes, and specifically with theft, we're thinking about the person and we're thinking about the victim in the situation, and we're really compassionate to them, but we're not compassionate to the person that robbed something. We're not thinking, why did they feel the need to do this? Because, and I say this like specifically for the people I have in mind, which are low-income people, we don't rob for fun. A lot of the times low-income people rob because they need something. They need food. They need like a nice warm coat. They need clothing. They need all these things and just can't afford to buy it. And then secondly, with that education piece, right now that I'm in a school that has enough funding, I'm seeing how many resources are out there and how much time I spent not getting those resources. I went to a very underfunded school to a point where there was days where I wouldn't come in because I knew there was going to be a sub. And I don't mean one sub, I mean a sub for most of my classes. So there's this learning gap where I'm seeing students behind me as I'm walking to class talk about their private school experiences, talking about how they were able to go on all these flights, on all these amazing trips through their schools. And my fun trip was in kindergarten in Roger Williams. And then after that, Roger Williams Park Zoo. And then after that, it stopped because we couldn't afford it anymore. And then after that, we had broken Chromebooks for about, I think they were 6 years old by the time I graduated, and we're still using them. And our textbooks were kind of like dying out. So we had to switch to online, which was another expense. And then the teachers did not get to have the trainings for those textbooks. So it's just a lot of issues that we have to think about. Economics is a byproduct of our society. And so we have to look more deeply about the foundations of our society. For example, justice, education, and then health.
So, of course, I hope for Rhode Island to thrive economically in ways such as using our state budgets in ways that we need. And I'm saying that, like, emphasizing that as a student. I really want to emphasize what Marco just said about the Chromebooks and textbooks. When our schools adequately equip us with the right resources, they are preparing us to study to become successful. And with that, we have millions and millions of dollars of funding, which we do not know what our school uses it for. I was a part of a group. It was called, we worked on this thing called ESSER, where we did a little thing where we went to our schools and asked them what we use our funding for and who's in charge of it. And my school said it was confidential information when it is not. Instead of using our funds for things that we need, like the right programs for our school, new textbooks, new Chromebooks, our schools are using them for security cameras. They are using them to fund other things instead of things like mental health, which students really need. So instead of setting us up for failure, they need to set us up for success.
So for me, economic justice is really just a means to the end, and the end being that everyone feels loved and everyone feels like they're a part of a community. I'm not someone who really cares about supply and demand or anything like that, but I think if the policies that we've all talked about here are enacted and implemented in a way that is equitable, we will have a Rhode Island where everyone is thriving and people can live their hopes and dreams.
Y'all, I cannot even put into words just how powerful all of that was. From your aspirations to the work that y'all are doing on a day-to-day basis, I want you all to understand just what a difference you are making. Whether it is for one life at a time, or to create an entire system of systemic change. Y'all have done so much in the amount of time that you've been on this earth. And what excites me the most is that y'all are just getting started. So please give it up for the Dreamers panel. Maria, Marco,
Cynthia, Sylvia, Mariana. Now keep it going.
Hello. I'm Nina Harrison. I'm the Policy Director at the Economic Progress Institute, and I am a little bit scared because what a tough act to follow. I'm so inspired by the dreamers we just heard from, and I'm really excited to introduce you to our amazing panel of community leaders. We have a panel featuring amazing leaders who have collectively have decades of experience working on issues including child welfare, economic empowerment, combating poverty and racism, disability rights, immigrants' rights, community organizing, business, and philanthropy. This morning, they will share their hopes and dreams for Rhode Island, and they'll respond to the dreams that we just heard from the Dreamers panel and talk about how we can bring them to fruition. So I'd like to invite our panel to come up. We have Ashley Deckert. She has served in direct service and leadership positions in the public and private sector, and she is currently the Director of the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. Dwayne Keys works at Compass Working Capital, a nonprofit organization dedicated to ending asset poverty with a focus on Black and Latino women-led households. He's also an EPI board member. Tina Gwinnett Pedersen is a motivational speaker and founder and CEO of the national nonprofit RAMP, Real Access Motivates Progress. This year, she also became a 2023 Rhode Islander of the Year. Juan Wilson is an entrepreneur and founder and CEO of the Muse Foundation of Rhode Island. And Katerina Lorenzo, Director of AMOR, the Alliance to Mobilize Our Resistance, which is an alliance of organizations mobilizing at the intersections of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and immigration status to fight state violence in the community. Thank you, panelists. My first question is for Director Deckert. You just heard the thoughts and hopes of our Dreamers panel. As the director of DCYF, what can you and the people in this room do to bring their goals and dreams to fruition?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. It's an incredible honor. And also, I'm inspired and hopeful about the present and the future. You guys should give another round of applause for them. I'll follow up on that because they're pretty awesome. So part of my job is to be able to advocate for the mirroring of child welfare policy and economic policy because they're very much so interconnected. In fact, when children, families, and youth across the nation have a lack of access to economic and concrete supports, it actually impacts the child welfare system significantly. In fact, if you're below the poverty line, you're 3 times more likely to be investigated for child abuse, neglect, and be indicated for child maltreatment. So there's a huge intersection. And so part of my job is making connections not only with our state legislators and community advocates and stakeholders to talk about how we do the mirroring of child welfare policy and economic policy, but also putting our money where our mouth is, right? So that means being actively a part of developing and writing legislation, collaborating with the community advocates as much as we can. You know, I work for the state government, so I sometimes have to take my policy hat off and put my government hat on. But as much as I can, be a champion for some of those, the changes that are needed. You know, I want to just highlight really quickly, and I'll move on so that you can move on to the next panelist, that has anyone ever heard of the 100% New Mexico initiative, New Mexico? Yes. Right? So for those who don't know what that is, one, look it up, it's amazing, and I think that we should figure out how we can learn from what they're doing in New Mexico, because they have 10 surviving and thriving services that they've identified for their communities. And it's really an effort to take a holistic view of what's lacking in their communities and how they can implement it. So I'll name off the 10 surviving: food security, housing security, medical and dental care, behavioral health care, and transportation. Those are the surviving things that everyone needs to survive. The thriving are job training, youth mentors, community schools, early childhood education, and parent supports. And what we heard from our young people included a mixture of all of those things. So what can we do to take a look at our entire human resources, our entire community landscape, and determine how we fill those gaps so that we can make sure that those things are in place for not only the young people that are coming up, but the children and families. And I commit to being a part of those conversations and the advocacy that's needed to move those things.
Thank you. Would any other panelists like to speak to how we can bring the dreamers' goals and hopes to fruition?
I can go next. Hello everyone, Dwayne Keys. So two thoughts for me are coming to mind, similar to Compass when it comes to our financial coaching model, where our clients is client-driven. Our clients are the best experts and decision makers in their lives. No one can tell them what's better for them than them. I would use that similar approach in which I would, in my dream, it would be the Dreamers panel. They will be the deciders, and whatever it is that we decide is going to happen. And so I will be there supporting them in terms of them actually, us bringing the ideas, whatever it is, how we solve it, to the table. They're setting the priorities, but then they are saying, yes, this is what we think is going to be great to help us and move forward, or no, we're not going to do that. And so if it's a yes, great, yay, how do I support them in terms of us moving this forward, with them being the deciders? If no, then do not pass go, do not collect $200, don't move forward. You go right on ahead in terms of finding another way to fit their needs. The other way, which I know I definitely can support, I'm seeing this, is also working with or supporting other experienced folks in terms of how to best support young people. Because just like we need white people to talk to other white people about racism, or men to talk to other men about sexism, we need other seasoned people to talk and support other seasoned people when it comes to adultism. Because as we just heard, they're listened to, but that's it, it's lip service. And no, it's not just lip service. We need to not just listen to them, but what they said what is best for them, we need to move forward with that, not just for them, but all the other historically excluded groups and communities. They know what's best for them, and let's support what they said they need.
Well, Dwayne said it eloquently. I feel the same way. It's simple. Just active listen and implement. I think we're more of the reactive panel. They're the proactive panel. And I'm more about being proactive. So it's simple, just to do what they suggest. Stop being reactive and be more proactive. Not just cheerleading the youth, right? Really taking their words at heed and their suggestions at heed and putting it into place when it comes to policy. Ways to fund it, I'm just going to throw that out here. You have some cannabis income coming into the state, and we're always looking for ways to fund different programs. And as far as I know, it's going into a wasted war on drugs that's failed. So why don't we use that fund to put some of the funds in what they're suggesting? So it's just simple, just get it done and really take it serious for what they're saying.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. I will say I am new mom and also a farmer and community leader. Then seeing that like my baby growing happy and everything, like as a mom, as a parents, we need the best for our kids, for our society. Saying that, and also as a farmer, I see this like in my free time I do that and I put a seed. And at that moment, of course, I'm waiting like beautiful fruit or like flowers or whatever I'm putting there. But that doesn't happen as a magic. I need to use all the best to put that seed and care when it's baby and when it's like medium age, I can say. But there is a moment where I like stop back and that plant is going to do the work by themselves. They are going to bloom, they are going to give fruits. It's more my, I am there if they need, but I don't need. That example applies for our youth. Because if we are like the parents, we don't have food, we don't have house, we don't have like a good environment to them, how we can think that we are like they are living in that situation and then we are going to expect another result of that situation? It's no way. If we think, yeah, magic exists, but when you are here and you see, no, that shouldn't be like that. Then I hear all the youth before that, yeah, there are leaders too in our community. They need us. We are not the expert. Also, the environment is changing. Then we also need to listen to them and support them in that way. But no needing words. We need to say, I listen to you. We need to say it because usually we are sometimes a generation that we don't say our emotion. And we better is to write a paper and you have this recognition. Not like that. We need to do it intentional and also like, as we hear a lot, they said mental health. All of that need to be in our environment. And yes, I think that is good to practice with our youth. Another thing that all the basic needs, we don't need to exploit our youth. They need fun. We need that money. They need that money. Especially when we are talking about community members like Black people, indigenous people, people of color, immigrants, undocumented people, how we can do like, yeah, you're struggling, but help yourself. No way, we can do that. As people, especially people that manage the budget from the state, I will speak for the state because for the country, that's another issue. I think we can say, yeah, where is our budget? What is the piece that goes to our community? That we can see that is changing. Like, and say no to other stuff that is demanding from us. But yeah, it's our taxes. We can have a decision on that. That's what I say.
Thank you. The next question is for Tina. According to the Rhode Island Department of Health, 20% of Rhode Islanders, not including the elderly, report having a disability. What are some of the most urgent needs that you're hearing from your community?
Oh, this is way to unpack. I got a lot to say on this. As you look around this room, I'm the only one sitting in this room in a wheelchair. But what people don't realize, 40% of Rhode Islanders use a mobility aid. Think about that. I'm the only one in this room, and 40% of Rhode Islanders use a walker, wheelchair, or a cane. Know why they're not here? Because they don't think it's accessible. They don't think that they can get in. We're talking about building affordable housing. We're talking about food insecurities. We can't get into the pantries. They're in bottom basements of churches. We can't get into our homeless shelters because I'm helping 30 people in wheelchairs on the street right now, not for the fact that they can't afford something. There's no place for them to go to get in. They're young like me or younger. I'm kind of middle-aged, so we're in the middle. We won't give out my age. But there are just so many people that we can't even get in. We're the largest minority in the world. Think about that. Disability is the largest minority in the world. And we don't discriminate across the board. We are in every other minority across the board. And we're not taken seriously. We're not accepted. I've been invited. This is the first panel I've ever been invited that I could actually get on the stage because they built a ramp for me to get up here. Usually I'm sitting out in front of the stage, again, the oddity, and not included. We need to do better. We need to do funding. Every one of you put on an event or own a business or know a business owner. Take a look at how many I could actually get into. Somebody like me, how can I get in? I can't get a job if I can't get in. We have bills like the Sherlock plan that I could actually work more than 40 hours a week and not have my SSDI taken away. Everybody's like, if you're working a job, why do you need SSDI? Because with SSDI comes Medicare, Medicaid, and they cover way more than any private insurance would ever cover. Private insurance does not cover my wheelchair, does not cover catheters, does not cover the things that I need on a daily basis to live. That's why we need it. I don't want to say I can't work overtime. I don't want to say that I can't take a raise when all of my coworkers are. I just got a presidential appointment and I had to waive my fee because if I got my fee when I go to work for the president, I will lose my SSDI and all my benefits. How fair is that? You do the work, you get recognized for your work, and you can't take your pay like everybody else. Then they wonder why we're begging and we're asking because we can't live in homes, we have no place to go, and we're living on the street. We need to do better. It's not just a disability community. Every elder, I ended up in a wheelchair in 5 minutes. I walked into a surgery and suffered a spinal stroke. Literally woke up 5 minutes later with no use of my legs. Car accident, running across the street, falling down, breaking your back. Anybody can end up like this, if we're not prepared. 40% of Rhode Islanders use a mobility aid. 87% of our state is inaccessible to me. That's where we need. Every bill that is written needs to have disability and accessibility written into it. Every bill that is written needs to make sure that they're taking account for people like me, who come in all ages, all shapes and sizes, all minorities, and we're being excluded on a daily basis. Do better.
Thank you. Katarina, I also wanted to ask you, with your experience as a community organizer, what are you hearing as the most urgent needs from your community and particularly the immigrant community?
Okay, especially in the immigrant community, is housing, that is the fears, because people, the majority, the one that I work with is undocumented people. They don't have some of the privilege that other residents with documentation have. Then they think that is the fears. And second, food. There is no the most that people work, one work, two job, that doesn't cover the bills, the food for the people, for the kids. Then definitely that is no good. The other one is mental health. We go there. Why? Because when you are living in this state without documentation, you always think that there is somebody looking after you, that one day eyes appear in your door or at your work or wherever you see you, then you are going to pick up. Can you imagine that living with that thing on you? No. That is people always with problems. I think for me that is, another one is access to service in general, because that's true. We are in this country that the language is English, right? But it's true, we have other people that speak another language and they are not monolingual, they are multilingual. That means we need to have the services in different language, not only Spanish, because Spanish is one we know, but no, there is too many languages in the world, there's too many immigrant refugees from different world, coming here, and we need to give that. And I all have experienced that directly. I learned the machine, the computer, and also somebody is talking in other space, but it's better if we build it local capacity and not looking for that, because when you're talking about serious things like mental health, it's not the same. It's I don't know how to say it, but you're eating something that is not natural. Then you miss the interest, you are in a conversation that is nice because you're face by face with a person. When you're doing through machine, it's not labor, it's not the thing that's happening there. And for us as a community organization, we always looking supporting policies that support multilingual and also access, and also asking for partnership that they can also do the same, because that's what we need to be, to welcome people and also making people happy and less problem.
Thank you. Dwayne, EPI believes that working for equity ensures that policies, programs, and budgets correct historic disparities and designs new policies, programs, and budgets that provide access and opportunities for all Rhode Islanders. How do you center equity in the work that you do?
So at Compass, I already had spoke about our clients and their focus. I like to use the analogy: the client is driving, I'm in the passenger seat as a coach. We're driving. If the client makes a turn left, I talk about what could happen and give that advice and education. If you go right, this is what could happen, but the client as the driver makes the decision of where we're going on this journey. And so another concept that we have done at Compass is also power of those that we are serving. It's not just they have the advice or expertise, they also need to be the deciders. So about 3 years ago, we had started our client advisory board made up of current and graduated clients in our program to get their thoughts, opinions, ideas about what ways in which we can provide that direct support work for them. That has since evolved into our programs committee, which is a committee on our board of directors. And so it still continues when we bring up the ideas and goals and thoughts of what it is that we want to do to support and serve them. But if they don't approve, then guess what? We don't move forward with what our idea was. It's all centered and focused on what did they say that they needed, how is it that they needed, and how do we move forward with that in terms of the way that works for them. The other thing that I want to just think about is also centering equity in terms of those who are in power is going to those people where they are. It's not just those who have the lived experience, but going where they are at. Meeting them where they are at that moment in time and getting the information that you need to have that better understanding experience. I've heard this before, we need to show up at the city hall and at the state house, and I understand that, that's all good, there's most people to show up, but then, hey, you want my opinion? You come to me. You go to me. You ask me where I'm at, when I'm available, not when you're available, because again, you want my support and my involvement. You go there, so that's the customer service in me saying, you want a sale, you go support and get and convince your customer to be engaged with you. And in the same way, as I said before, when you have these goals, these ideas, and these dreams, and I've seen this multiple times, do not put together and move forward with a plan, but going back to those same people first, asking them what they think, getting their feedback, getting their buy-in to move forward. I've seen this plenty of times where, but the community said that we needed this and that. Yeah, but I never said that that specific idea was what was going to solve the problem. So we need to take time to not just listen, but also find a way that whatever solution we're putting forward is fitting what the folks said they need. And so again, I'm going to go back to sharing power. So the factor is that these are the folks that we're trying to serve. They should be the deciders of what we say is going to work. It is, I know some people say it's not easy. It is very easy if you're willing to let go of power.
Thank you, Dwayne. One, how can philanthropy and investment in Black and brown business create generational wealth and help eliminate the racial wealth gap?
That's another one that can be unpacked forever. I consider myself a first-generation philanthropist in my family. Someone that looks at it differently than philanthropy is presented now. I'm actually not a fan, and I started a foundation focusing on demystifying philanthropy. And that means for most of us. If you hear a FUBU, for us, by us, that's pretty much the premise of why they created the Muse Foundation. As far as Black businesses, I have the liberty and the ability to be an unpaid ED at my foundation because of what I do as an entrepreneur in the field of music publishing and IP and owning intellectual property. I come from those poverty levels and climb that way, and just had a focus on being self-sufficient. Self-sufficiency is really, really big with me. And when I work in the nonprofit sector, it's no different than the for-profit sector. For-profit wants to be in the black, nonprofits want to be self-sustainable. So you have to look at things in the fringe, and that's what I do. So to speak on that is for small businesses and nonprofits, they all need to be treated the same, have the same resources. Stop looking at an or versus an and. I'm in both worlds. I still have a for-profit and I have a nonprofit. And I'm using my for-profit methods to find ways, like I said, in the fringe when I mentioned cannabis. So now my nonprofit will be working in the cannabis field. And that might be like, early on, that's what you're doing? I said, yes, I can. And there's ways to do that so I can make sure that this organization is self-sustained and not dependent on grants and not dependent on restricted grants and restricted funds that come in. When you give it to me, I can't even pay the people that are implementing these plans because it's program specific. And another reason why I'm going to share that, I just want to be the founder. I'm my legacy. My great mentors, someone mentioned about having mentors, was the late Michael Van Leeson, who happened to be my cousin, got me into this field. Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right.
Sorry, that happened the time I mentioned him. He put the battery in my back to do the work I'm doing. I said I wasn't going to do this, and I'm doing it. But yeah, this in this space, look, I'm really passionate about this work. Thank you. And I was pretty emotional. And I accept this, like I said, these emotions, sharing it. I just want to get my words out. I can cry in a moment. I love my mom. I'm raised with a lot of women. We do a lot of crying. And I love her to death. Yeah, so I'm just to get to the point. It's you can be in both worlds. You don't have to cut programs. Find creative ways to get funding to do these programs. We have a youth summit coming up a week from Monday. Go turn up. I have young voices and Outrage for the first time participating in this youth summit, which my ultimate goal is to make sure that they run this summit, and then we just provide the resources they need from an adult perspective, right? So I know that's far from the question, but philanthropy is just one way, right? And I want to utilize philanthropy to use my human capital, social capital, to find ways to bring Black wealth. I highlight the beat of BIPOC. I tell that to Kyle all the time. Saying Black culture is what raised me, but I represent every single letter in that acronym. Black, Indigenous, people of color. So we all have mixed race. But yeah, it's just start where you can. We just established our first endowment with the Rhode Island Foundation for Rhode Island Black Philanthropy Month. No date had to step out, but I appreciate it's a 45-day process to get it done because I want to make sure it read because this is irrevocable funds, right? This is something that's going to be around when I'm not. And I wanted to make sure it plays into what the goal is and the mission of the Muse Foundation. So you can start that. I learned that 10 businessmen 100 years ago put in $1,000, and now they manage over $1 billion in assets. So Angie and Kuma told me this was very significant in what we were doing, but everybody in this room can do it. Everyone in this room can start that form of philanthropy and have their mission driven. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. And now the question that we're asking everybody in this room to answer, so don't forget to scan the QR code to share your hopes and dreams with us. I'd like to ask everybody on the panel, what are your hopes and dreams for economic justice in the state of Rhode Island? And I'd like to start with you, Director Decker.
It's a great question. So first I'll start off by acknowledging that I'm going to be in a little bit of a good trouble right now. Because what I'm going to say might be controversial to most. I sort of take an abolitionist approach to child welfare. Woo! And the fact of the matter is that more than 60% of the reasons why families are involved in our child welfare system is due to neglect. So that means that about 40% or less are because of actual abuse to children. So what if we envisioned 10, 20 years from now a system where we didn't get involved in families' lives for reasons of neglect? So reasons of neglect might include inadequate supervision. So we talk about after-school programs that Marco mentioned. Ensure that those are in place so that families can actually work and not have to worry about the hotline being called on them, and then being investigated for inadequate supervision, or housing stability, making sure that children won't have to come into foster care because they don't have housing, right? What I envision for the state of Rhode Island, to be quite honest, the U.S., is that we can infuse concrete and economic supports and increase economic stability for our most vulnerable so that we can prevent child maltreatment, so that we can actually focus on those who are actually harmed as opposed to by reasons that we can actually control. So that's what I hope for.
So my hope is no poverty, and particularly no asset poverty. And the one way that we can get about it is eliminating those barriers to achieve that. So when I think about that, I think about what did we do for white men during the Great Depression in the 1930s with the New Deal. Well, we need to have that same energy and that same level of focus for our black and brown communities. We eliminate all these expectations that, well, in their case, someone's poor, we need to make sure they are financially literate, or we need to make sure they have financial education. No. We need to make sure that people have cash and capital to do what it is that they need to do. That's one thing that really irks me when I hear, oh, do you do financial literacy? No, we do financial education, but more importantly, we help families navigate through systems that were not designed for them to benefit. One in which we also deal with the financial trauma that black and brown people are enduring as a result of these systems as well. We don't talk about that, we don't name them, but we need to talk about the economic violence and the financial trauma that has led to these outcomes, and how do we get to a place of wealth justice? That's one area where I'm really elevating it in that particular area. Again, also, we talk about the legislation, the policy, the regulations, but we don't talk about these institutions and how they go about this work. Because we hear, oh, we gave X amount of money to this organization, that agency, but then next thing you know, there's all these barriers to get access to that money. Why? Because there are internal rules, protocols, practices that are put in place that are not part of the legislation or the regulation or how we go about it, but because that institution, that body of folks who are not made up of those who are going to be directly impacted, said this is how we need to go about it. So that needs to be not just diversified again, they need to have true representation, true power. Those rules, regulations, protocols need to be reformed and changed. So as I look at some of the folks in this room who are part of those bodies and they see work, what I'm saying is you, in terms of your agency institution, you have to change, not the people you're trying to serve.
Accessibility. We talk about equal opportunity and equity. I want the same opportunities as everybody else. Do you realize that my chair does not fit on one bus in this state? Not one bus in this state. So even if I could get to the bus, I can't get on it. We have one wheelchair accessible taxi in the entire state that covers the entire state. One. And they don't know how to tie down a wheelchair. So how safe do you feel with that thing? Having my own vehicle is $106,000 for me to own a vehicle that I could drive. Who can afford that? Nobody. How do I get a job if I can't get there? How do I get a job if I can't get in the building? When I run on hard times, I can't couch surf. How many of you could invite me into your home? I have a lot of friends in this room. But how many in this room could I get into your house to couch surf if I'm running on hard times? Not one. We don't have any options. We don't have anywhere to go. We're being forgotten. We're 40%. And that number is going up with the aging population of 60 and older in Rhode Islanders for 2030. We're going to be over half the population, and we can't get into 87% of the states. So how do we talk about equal opportunity? How do we talk about anything else when we're leaving out? My legs don't work, my mouth sure does, trust me. I have a brain in my head. I I can do any job that anybody tells me to do. We have to work 10 times harder just to be taken seriously, 20 times harder to be seen as exceptional. But if we can't get in the building, if you're creating an event and you're not thinking of me coming to your event or somebody like me, you're failing. I'm sorry. If you're creating an organization and you're not thinking of inviting my community, you're failing. I'm having an event on October 14th at the Times 2 Academy called Accessibility is Beautiful. I have 75 vendors that sell a physical good that are all disabled. All my entertainment for the entire day is from disabled people. Every legislator will be there because we make them look good. But I'm telling you, these people are talented. We are creative. We can work. We can do the job. But if legislation is not written with us in mind, with accessibility for us and being able to pay us what you pay everybody else, I'd like to see anybody in here live on $900 a month, because that's what the average of SSDI is. It's not a living wage. If you get on SSDI after you're married and you fall out of love, you're in an abusive, guess what? You're going to be abused for the rest of your life, because if you get divorced, you lose your SSDI. You can reapply. It takes 48 to 60 months to get it back. Who can live 48 to 60 months with no health insurance and no money? Nobody. These are facts. This is not being negative. This is facts. I make it look good, but it's a struggle every day. We need to be taking this community into accommodation. And my organization will come to any business event or organization, and we will assess you for free. So what does it cost you, or what do you lose by calling me up and saying, can you come check out my event? Can you make sure that people, and when I put your event out there, 1,500 more people came to PVD Fest this year that were like me, because I did the accessibility. I live it. I can bring in more people need more money. We have money to spend. Let us in the door.
Yeah, we talk about equity a lot, and this is even to allude on what Dwayne was saying. Systems that were not built for us, right? So why do I want equity in a system that's not built for us? Why do I want to be retrofitted? But when I sit at the tables and talk about liberation scares folks, right? It scares when I talk about liberating. But I'm going to talk about liberating. To liberate systems puts everyone on the same socioeconomic status. Or we always will deal with the same disparities and the same issues will perpetuate. Level the field, right? So say I'm in with this, let's all be honest to ourselves. In a capitalist society, even the nonprofit sector benefits from disparities. So really, sorry, make sure I lose my notes, because if not, I can talk forever. I'm going to keep on track. To really make systems change, you have to be willing to level everyone's social-economic status to be equal. As long as there's a hierarchy, there will always be disparities. Those who know me, I am an advocate for Black culture and Black learning and Black power and the Black community. It is where I was raised. My genetic makeup, like I said, represents every single letter in the BIPOC. Even though I hate using that acronym, I'm tired of labels, but represents everything. I tell everybody I'm half import and half domestic. So that's just how I explain myself. With that, my Toyota. With all that said, my hope and dreams are for all of us to liberate systems and honor humanity overall. Never mind focusing on the differences, focusing on what's the same. Thank you.
Okay, the last one. Okay, yeah, I emphasize what Juan said about liberation, about that this system is not built for us, for the people, for our well-being, for our liberation. It's not. It's for profit. Profit then, as I said a few minutes ago, how we can expect one thing from other. You put a seed here that is, I don't know, like beans. Are you expecting corn from it or like flowers? No, it is logic doesn't work like that. And how we can, for me, and I have been in different situation, family, organizational things, coalition things, everything. What happens if you have something dirty, disorganized, and you want to just hustle or make something better from it? In some point, whatever you did wrong in the foundation, it will appear. Then you need to clean, you need to reform, you need to make sure that your column, like your value, your principles should be clear. Then you can expect good things. Otherwise, we are just like putting one thing here and one other here and see it's not going somewhere. And I think that goes for the people that focus on policy work or lawmaker. Is there something can be done? But also, that is just a question. And I don't want you to respond because I know that we said that we need to work with people, like everybody, like youth, all the people, not like only, I know there is a bridge between lawmakers and community members, or in general people. Then we need to make that accessible, and not only somebody like, oh, I know how to do it, should be accessible to people. That knowledge, that right, because it's a right also, because there is being approved or right in those different policies. It's not only for a certain group, then we should know it and understand it. And another thing that I was seeing is like, yeah, I think I lose my mind, but like, there is something I want to say, like, yeah, the youth, that always should be present. And one of them, they said something that is true, and they're so younger, we said, and they don't know things. No, they were living, or they're living with us in our home, in our family. They know the parents struggling with paying rent, paying bills, paying that and paying that. Then we come like, yeah, there is economic violence right there. They're seeing it, they're living it, they're experiencing it. And one of them, they said, we need financial freedom. That is always my hope in my life, like when I was like little, like, I don't want to repeat what happened with my parents. I make all the effort and move that I could do in my each time to make difference. I think that shouldn't be something like that, sacrifice a lot to get in that point. And when you get in that, when you don't have financial freedom, what happened? Also they said, why you are here? Are you here because you have money, because you don't have a job, then you have like free time to come here? Or because you are in a work, then you come here, like myself, for example. The people that doesn't have financial freedom, what happened? They don't think about solution. They feel the problems, but they don't see where is the roots. They don't have time to think about that. They have time what to put on the table today. How they going to pay rent tomorrow? Like that is the problem. That is why they don't sleep. Not like us, like, oh, how am I going to move the policy? How am I going to move the community? That is not what they have, because yes, fears. If you are hungry or you are outside in the cold or like under the rain, you're not going to look for shelter, for food. You're not going to look for being given a table and in a discussion and like doing that. No, then it's just like easy, but so difficult at the other side. Then I think that's what we need to think. We are, we are lucky, I guess, or to be here, but the majority of the people, they're fighting outside with life, just surviving for eating.
Thank you so much. Our panelists have done a great job of highlighting the need for systemic change in Rhode Island. We have some extraordinary people here on the panel, but as they've highlighted, it shouldn't take extraordinary people doing extraordinary things just to meet their basic needs and survive. And as EPI's policy director, I have definitely been taking notes. I always want to hear what your concerns, your needs, and dreams for your communities are, so I've definitely written everything down. I want to thank our amazing panelists for being here and for all the important work you do for our communities. And thank you to everyone here who's also working to make Rhode Island a better and more equitable place where all Rhode Islanders have access to power and the opportunity to thrive. I hope you will stay encouraged, keep dreaming, and keep fighting, and don't leave yet. Thank you.
Thought you were coming to a conference, but you came to school today. Our panelists have definitely schooled us and given us lessons and action steps. I am so grateful to every single speaker, and I am inspired as well, because we all need a little bit of inspiration here and there. To end this program with me, I would like to bring up the next speaker that is evident that I stand on the shoulders of social justice giants. And I do not take it for granted that I get to live the dream of leading an organization like EPI because of the vision, tenacity, and fight of two women. I am eternally grateful and humbled to have been chosen to carry out the legacy of Linda Katz and the late Nancy Kurtz, to a woman who has been described as having ruthless compassion, helping to welcome my mentor, my friend, EPI co-founder, Linda Katz.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Rick. So, thank you for inviting me to make a few remarks. I have to say I'm really moved to be up here. What an amazing conference. So many incredible speakers, so much energy and power surging through the room. Can you all feel the power? Yeah? Feel the power. And everyone is here because they're committed to economic justice for all Rhode Islanders. And that's a really big goal, and certainly one putting all of our energy and hearts into. Everybody spoke about their passion. My passion, along with Nancy Gortz, in starting the Poverty Institute about 20 years ago. We were called the Poverty Institute. Our passion was around welfare reform. And we were moved by Parents for Progress, which was then a grassroots organization of women who organized and advocated for a better cash assistance program, then called AFDC, now called Rhode Island Works. And the program, they were advocating for better support for themselves and their children. And Nancy and I understood and were appalled by the racism and sexism that undergirded the paucity of the program, that suffered from the Republican-promoted stereotypes of the welfare queen, and that allowed the Democratic House, Senate, and President in 1996 to, again quotes, end welfare as we know it. But ending welfare as we know it was not by enacting an adequate income, access to job training and higher education, quality child care and health insurance, but instead by requiring work in dead-end jobs, time limits on benefits, making immigrants ineligible for coverage, and other restrictive rules. And federal funds to support the program, again, for young children and their parents, were capped through a block grant. I won't go into the long history of advocacy around Rhode Island's cash assistance program, but there will be a tutorial after this session if you want to join it. So from FIP, the Family Independence Program, which Parents for Progress and a coalition of community providers and advocates enacted, and was hailed as a model program to support moms and their kids, to FIP's demise and replacement by Rhode Island Works. And you heard Alan, you saw Alan's slide that showed about the disinvestment in the Rhode Island Works program, that the state's investment of our own tax dollars went to zero about 10 years ago. But on top of that, the share of the federal block grant, which is $96 million a year, has each year become less and less in terms of direct support for families. So you should know that EPI, along with partners, worked for a number of years to try to get a benefit increase for the program, the benefit had not been increased in 30 years. Hard to imagine. But we didn't succeed in making a benefit increase that lifted children out of poverty. They're still living in poverty because we couldn't get as much money as was necessary to at least give a basic grant that would support children in a way that they're entitled to be supported. And also, people with green cards still can't get cash assistance for 5 years. Over the years, the Poverty Institute became the Economic Progress Institute, mostly because when we said the word poverty to legislators, their eyes would glaze over and they wouldn't listen. So we thought, well, if we talk about economic progress, that's a more positive focus, and we didn't see the shutdown from legislators. Part of me feels like we should never have changed our name from the Poverty Institute, but that's water under the bridge. So the Economic Progress Institute expanded into other areas, trying to improve the state's workforce development system to be responsive to people with disabilities, people whose first language is in English, adults who were failed by the K-12 system, and we sure heard a lot of that from some of the youth today, and so they needed to go get their GED. And as you know, EPI is the preeminent organization in the state analyzing the state's tax and budget policies to ensure adequate resources to support critical priorities. And Alan's presentation was a testament to that today. I was really incredibly moved and impressed by all of the speakers today and the passion that everybody has for their own issues and their analysis of the problems and proposed solutions. I think our challenge is, while we each have our own vision and our own focus, how do we bring all of that energy, all the power in this room to get to a Rhode Island that is truly fair and just? Where are our commonalities? How do we support each other? Over the years, EPI has been committed to working in partnership and coalition with other advocacy organizations and grassroots groups. And I know that that important work will continue. And in closing, as Dr. King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Today's conference is a wonderful jumping off point for bending that arc, and I wrote bending that arc a little more quickly, but I think we will need to say much more quickly. So how do we bend that arc much more quickly? We've all waited long enough for justice. Thank you.
All right, now I want to get you all home because I know you spent this morning with us. To our amazing keynote speaker, Benoit Silvermoon, who had to leave, to Linda, our state leaders, our moderators, and panelists. I cannot thank you enough. Once again, I want to thank our sponsors, board members, community partners, and volunteers. You have been more than generous with your time, support, money, and partnership. As we end today, you can see your drains have been up on the drain wall. And we are a research organization, so this data we're collecting as well. But it was for us to see collectively that we get to dream together. And I can really read that because my eyes are going bad the younger I get. So I don't know if someone in the audience wants to shout out a dream you see up there that touches you. Let's shout out a couple of dreams to end with.
Universal housing.
Yes.
Universal paid leave.
Yes.
Universal basic income.
Universal housing. Have I chaired in the table after you open that door?
High quality of education for children regardless of wealth.
Access for all.
Access for all.
Thriving and not just surviving.
Amen. Amen to all of that. And we'll share these with you as a follow-up to this conference. These are our dreams from our lips to all of our ears, because we all need to hear it to get it to action. I would now like to call to the stage and end with my incredible team. For those who are not in the room, is everyone at EPI in this room? If not, please step in. And Michelle Montgomery as well. I'm in awe, and I say this all the time, and I'm not joking when I say I get emotional, by the people I have to lead. All the things we talk about, if you're in our team meeting, you will understand. This team, we mean business when it comes to economic justice. We've put together a team that is willing to work with every single person who cares about where we are in Rhode Island. They care very, very much. And even putting this conference together. 2 weeks ago, half of our team were in DC at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities Conference. Last week, I was away. Yesterday, I was at the RISE conference dancing on the 360 like I didn't have a care in the world. When we knew we had a major conference today. And why is that? Because of my team. I trusted them, and I knew we were going to be okay because I knew the conference we brought together was out of our love for economic justice, and it was going to be just fine. I was sick this week, and I didn't feel like I was and our fiscal year ends tomorrow, and we're still here. They have been patient with my nitpicking, my crazy ideas and dreams, because that's the type of leader I am, and they made it come to pass. We worked together. When you dream of economic justice in Rhode Island, I want you to dream with these people in mind, and I'm going to call them up to join me on the stage. Karina Tutoya, our office manager, please give it up. Andrew Gandy, our communications director, who is so patient with me. I have a vision, I don't know how to say it, and you have to interpret what I mean. Javier Gobela, our newest policy analyst working on workers' justice and tribal justice issues. Alan Preston, our director of research and fiscal policy. Vivian Nair, who you hear from here, a powerful young woman on our team. Sonia Grace, our director of operations, who allowed me to take care of you and sleep all this week. Nina Harrison, our policy director. Someone needs to help and to take pictures because I want him up on this stage.
Andrew, get up there. All right, now
and take his picture too. And last but not least, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities is one of our national partners. And when I told them I was putting together my first conference, a conference of hope, one of the best reached out to me and said, I will help you with this conference. And they sent her to join us this week to make sure it happened. If you have been to a center conference of convening, you know. Please help me to welcome and thank Michelle Montgomery, all the way from Maryland, the Center on Budget and Policy Priority Conference and Training Manager. Thank you, Michelle. Please join us. This, you all, is our team. Hold us in your prayers, support us, partner with us, because we are in this fight together with you. And thank you our board members who are powerful. I love my board. Board members, please stand up. I know some of you introduced yourself. And if you've been a former board member at EPI, please stand up as well. This is the team, you all. To close our conference, in the words of another young person with a vision of hope, Amanda Guman, there is always a light. If only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it. My hope and dream is that we are brave and bold enough to achieve economic justice in our states. Keep on dreaming and have a great day. Thank you. You're free to go now. Thank you all so much. It was good having you.